This episode of the DAV Podcast contains material intended for mature audiences, and listener discretion is strongly advised. Please be aware that the discussion includes explicit language and detailed coverage of sensitive topics that some listeners may find difficult or triggering. Specifically, we will be discussing suicide and suicidal ideation, alcohol abuse and addiction, post-traumatic stress, war-related trauma and the death of service members, and the unconventional therapeutic use of ayahuasca, MDMA, and other psychedelic substances. If any of these topics are distressing for you, please proceed with caution.
On this edition of the DAV Podcast, we hear from Justin, a combat veteran who served as an infantry marine in Fallujah and Ramadi. After leaving the service, Justin spent a decade as a firefighter struggling with depression, anxiety, and alcohol abuse.
Everything I was doing was to look good to other people. The end. I got involved with veteran nonprofit work. Just everything I was doing was to look good to other people. And every bit of it was a cover-up, man. A cover-up of a cover-up of a cover-up of a cover-up. I just didn't want people to know how I was feeling internally.
On the brink of suicide, he made an impulsive decision to try the psychedelic medicine ayahuasca, which led to a spiritual awakening.
I lived a profane life at that time, Matt. I was not religious. I was anti-religious. There is no God. How could there possibly be a God?
Through that experience, Justin discovered a pathway out of the darkness and a purpose beyond his pain. Stay tuned as Justin shares the harrowing moment he chose life right now on the DAV Podcast.
So can you tell me a little bit about your military service here? How did you find yourself in the United States Marine Corps?
I got fired from 2 jobs right out of high school, and I had met with my dad. Me and my dad weren't on good terms at the time, nor were we ever really. And it was an impulse decision. I had never wanted to be in the military growing up. I don't have a long family lineage of that. I'm the first person in my family to join the military. I did it to try and get my father's approval. I joined the Marine Corps, dude, because at the time we were in Iraq, like the original invasion of Iraq. And I always remember seeing Marines at that time on TV, and I knew they were Marines because of the camis they wore. At that time, the Marine Corps had this bitchin' ass digital camis, man. They were the only branch to have them, so they stood out.
I remember.
Yeah, dude, and that is literally why I picked the Marine Corps, because of the camis. And I didn't even I knew so little about the military. I didn't even know that the Marine Corps had multiple jobs. I thought the Marine Corps was just solely infantry. That's all. That's all I thought it was. So after I took the test, he's like, "Man, you can go into any job you want." And I was sort of like, "What are you talking about?" I don't know that there was multiple jobs, and I wanted to be in the infantry. None of the other jobs appealed to me, so that's why I picked that.
Totally understandable. And you deployed to Iraq, correct?
I deployed to Fallujah in 2005, Ramadi in 2006, and then 2007 I was with the 22nd MEU, Marine Expeditionary Unit. We were on ship, and we stopped in Africa, uh, hung out a ton in the Persian Gulf area. So that was my 3 deployments.
And how would you, you mentioned Fallujah. Were you there for the battles?
Nope. So I replaced 1-8, which was one of those spearhead units in Operation Phantom Fury in 2004. We replaced them in December of '04. And then after that, it was that second battle of Fallujah had just ended when we got there. And then it was a lot of policing the Fallujah area, both the city and then the outskirts of it. So my company was tasked with an area outside of Fallujah, between Fallujah and the Abu Ghraib prison.
And how would you categorize the level of combat during these deployments?
So Fallujah, it was underwhelming, man. As an infantry marine, and we're getting reports daily on the combat in Fallujah, on the workup in the 6 months up to it. So we're expecting that type of action on a daily basis, and it wasn't that. And so being a a young man who'd been training for this for so long. I was 19 at the time, so having trained for this for so long, and then the actual amount of combat I seen in that deployment was very underwhelming. A lot of IEDs on that deployment, and mortars, indirect fire, but very infrequent actual combat with an enemy.
I remember from Iraq staying and hearing it's Operation Iraqi boredom, essentially.
Sit around and wait. Sit around
Yep.
and wait to sit around and wait, man.
And then every now and then something blows up underneath your wheels, right? Something like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And dude, I was, going home, I was embarrassed about that to go back to like on leave and be around the people that I grew up with. Like that was embarrassing for me because everybody expected it to be so much. And I was like, well, I just didn't have it.
So let's talk a little bit about your transition to the Marine Corps.
Well, I'll say this. I'll say
Yeah.
this, then we'll jump into that. Now, Ramadi, I went into that thinking with the same mindset. Well, now this is going to be a letdown. Yeah, we're hearing about all this. And then we get there, and then within 3 weeks of me being Ramadi, four guys in my platoon have been killed. It was Ramadi was what I thought Fallujah was going to be, and it was consistent fighting on a daily basis in the 7 months that I was there.
Gotcha. You did your job, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
there you go.
Yeah, yeah. And sorry to hear about your fellow Marines, man.
Yeah, thank you.
Tough. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about your transition here. Everyone, they have their own different transition story. What's yours?
I got out and had no clue what I was going to do. And which is very much like going in the Marine Corps. I was not sure what I was going to do with in life at that point and spontaneously made that decision. So, likewise, when I got out, I spontaneously made a decision to go into the fire service. You're going to cut this part out, I'm sure, but I'm
Yep.
going to be
Okay.
I'll be honest with you. I picked becoming a firefighter because I thought you get a lot of chicks in that profession. Like that's literally I had been divorced in the Marines. This is the first time that I was really single in my adult life. So I was just like, oh, I just want to chase chicks. So that's literally why I went into that profession. And I did that. So I was a firefighter and a paramedic for about a decade, a little short of a decade. In that time frame, in that decade, my life was slowly unraveling. And by the end of that, like the wheels just came off.
Yeah, we're kind of careening towards your experience with psychedelics, but what
Yeah.
was some of the leading up to that?
Everything that I was doing, and a lot of this was, I would say the majority of it was unconscious, but there were definitely conscious aspects of well. Everything I was doing was to look good to other people. The end. Becoming a firefighter, that looked good to other people. I got super involved in the union in my time in the fire service, both at the state, international level. I got involved with veteran nonprofit work. Just everything I was doing was to look good to other people, and every bit of it was a cover up, man. A cover up of a cover up of a cover up of a cover up. I just didn't want people to know how I was feeling internally. And for the majority of that decade, I'm toggling between three emotions: anxiety, depression, anger. The end. And I just didn't want people to know that about me. And dude, I was a chameleon. I was a people-pleasing, approval-seeking performer, man. And I had people tricked and had people really like immediate people, family members, my partner, friends. I had people duped, man, into thinking that my life was really good. And underneath, I was just falling apart. I drank about it. I started drinking when I was 14 years old, and that was like going right into the main line, man. That was the fir that erased all my anxiety and depression and worry when I was a teenager, and I felt relaxed and comfortable, could interact with people, and I just carried that through, especially in the Marine Corps. I really picked up my drinking there, and then outside of it, got to the point, man, where I couldn't go through a day without drinking to some degree. And that was towards the end of my time in the fire service.
So these emotions, anxiety, anger, and depression, do any of these stem from your time in the Marine Corps?
I thought they did. I was at that point in my life, I was completely convinced that what was going on for me was PTSD, and that I had that from being in war. I- Around the end of that time, the fire service is when I first went to the VA. And when I went there, And I wasn't open about this. I wasn't telling people that I went there. And the first time I go there, I get diagnosed with PTSD and with alcohol abuse disorder. And I had spent roughly a year going through the VA, and the conversations that I'm having with clinicians, whether it's psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers going through like the vet center, it's all centered around PTSD. And Justin, you have this from war. So I didn't look anywhere else. I wasn't thinking about that this could possibly be anything else other than what I thought it was and what these professionals are telling me.
Interesting. So now let's talk about psychedelics. How did you hear about it, and what drove you to make that choice?
Yeah, so we'll start with the what drove me there. I'd got into a confrontation with a captain at work. He said something to the degree, and I'm laughing because now, like looking back, he was absolutely right. There's no way I could have heard this at the time. He said, Justin, you get away with all this shit here that you do because you have these people convinced that you're some sort of war hero. Said something to that effect. And this guy wasn't in the military. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, I'm just gonna go home and get real drunk, and then I'm gonna go in and beat the shit out of this guy. And what actually took place is I find myself in a trance, sitting on the couch, and I'm going through this ritual of I have my pistol, and I'm watching a movie about a veteran who's suicidal. It's like there's the foreshadowing. I'm sitting on the couch and I'm going through this ritual of loading and unloading my pistol and putting it to my head and pulling the trigger and then drinking and then smoking some of my cigarette and just telling myself, well, eventually I'm going to forget to unrack that round and this will just all be over. This was like the first thought of suicide I ever had. This I wasn't contemplating this leading up to this. It happened that fast for me, and that really freaked me out. Very shortly after that, maybe a couple weeks, I went over to Washington, D.C. I had a lot of friends, some that I was in the military with, and then some that I just met over time that lived in D.C. It's like a real hub for veterans. I'm sure you know that. So I was over there hanging out with three of my friends. We're all talking about we're all not doing well. We're all in very similar places. Now, we're not openly saying to each other that we're suicidal. That's not being talked about. But we all were at that point in time. One of my friends, Wade, he said, which by the way, Wade would not mind his name being mentioned. I actually met Barry Jesenowski, and that's what started my connection, my relationship with DAV was through Wade. And Wade had mentioned, hey, any of you guys heard of ayahuasca? And none of us had heard of it other than him. And he had said he'd watched a documentary about it and it supposedly helps veterans of PTSD. So then this is 2016. So we're getting on the internet, and this is not being talked about at this time wide scale. Literally, the first place that we found was a place called Ayaquest in Campbellsville, Kentucky. And for people that don't know Campbellsville, Kentucky, that's in the middle of the Bible Belt down there. It's the type of place where you walk into the local diner and everybody stares at you if you're not from there, which literally happened. We went and ate breakfast there when we first got down there, and then like people were looking at us like you don't belong here. And it was in a trailer park in Campbellsville, Kentucky, man. And the website was very shady. It looked like a little kid had created the website. We were skeptical of what we were walking into, but it was four combat veterans and an active duty Green Beret was the group that I went down there with. So we were like, you know what? If this is bullshit, I think we can handle ourselves and we'll get our money back from this dude. And it didn't turn out that way. It actually he never the guy he's dead now, his name's Steve. He just died a couple years ago. He never pretended to be anything he wasn't. I'm a redneck Kentucky hillbilly. He'd done 15 years in federal prison for bank robbery, and that's where he learned about ayahuasca. His cellmate for a long period of time was a Peruvian shaman. He was being deported back to Peru, and this at the time. This is how they would house people they were deporting until they did it. They'd put them in these federal penitentiaries. It's crazy. But he said he's like, this guy was so so even keel that I thought he had to be on some drug. So I was going to figure out what he was taking and just steal it from him. And he's like, I watched him for 2 weeks. And he's like, clearly this guy was not on anything. So he made friends with him. This guy was a Peruvian shaman. And then when Steve finally got out of prison, this shaman had sent him some ayahuasca and he took it and completely changed his life. So he started doing it with people right around that time frame when we went down there. He'd only been doing it with people openly for a while, for maybe 6 months. It was a 2-day experience, and it was the most impactful experience of my life, still to this day. And
Wow.
I can talk about specifics and get into some of it if you want to. It's up to you.
Yeah, well, I want to talk a little bit about that first session with psychedelics and like kind of paint the picture for us.
Mhm.
What did it feel like? Can you describe the scenes, the emotions that you were feeling?
Yeah. I was really nervous going up to it. I'm really nervous. Like at that time, my mindset is this is a drug. And I'm culturally acclimated to think that this is a bad thing. I'm not looking at this as a sacrament, which is the way that indigenous people talk about it. So I'm nervous in going into this, but I genuinely don't want to feel the way that I feel, which is suicidal at this point. So I'm willing to try nearly anything. So I went into it with an open mind, scared, open mind, and I followed what he told us to do. Like he told us to eat a certain way, I ate that way. I showed up how he asked. Ultimately, what it was I like the language I have now, which I didn't have then. I would say I had a mystical experience. This was a spiritual awakening for me. I lived a profane life at that time, Matt. I was not religious. I was anti-religious. There is no God. How could there possibly be a God? I'm using this lens of being in war and thinking about those things. And I had a spiritual experience. It really funny. It it kicked in, and you drink ayahuasca, and it's not pleasant, the taste of it. We were told, like, with this, there's very good possibility that in the language that it's used with this is purge, which is throw up. So I was aware of that, and he was like, "Hey, don't hold that. Don't fight that. If you need to throw up, do that." And then he also said he gave very limited instruction. Just said, whatever is occurring, just let it be. Don't make meaning out of it. Just let it be, and it'll pass. So I went into it with that attitude, and I threw up relatively early. And after that, it was like a cleansing because then I could start to feel the medicine working. And the whole time I had my eyes closed. This is what he encouraged to do. And I had an eye mask. And he was playing music as well, and Native American music. And the experience started to happen. And then incredible visuals. There's no possible way that I could explain them to you, or explain them to anybody. It's ineffable. It's beyond words. But it was information, it was wisdom that was being shared with me. It was noetic, it was revelatory. It's something that I'd always known and had just been covered up all this time. And really, what the experience was, I experienced love for the first time. I had an idea of what love was before this. I thought love was something that you shared with another human being. It's between two people. And this was not that. This love was limitless. It was boundless. It was eternal. It was all that there was. There was and is nothing else. It was just that. Completely took away any fear of death for me in an instant because I knew that there's no such thing. All there is this love. That's it. And that stuck with me all this time. Now, I didn't have the language for it then. I have the language for it now through my study of religions, and I'm doing this at an academic level. I'm going for a Master of Divinity at a very prestigious school. And what I'm learning through studying all these different wisdom traditions is this is what they're all talking about, is this love thing that I experienced. And it turns out that this is just one way to experience that. There's multiple ways that cultures will get into these non-ordinary states of consciousness. They'll do it through meditation, they'll do it through fasting, drumming, using medicines like this. Yeah, it was, but like I said, by far the most impactful experience of my life. That's like, I look at my life like pre-ayahuasca, post-ayahuasca. It's a clear division for me.
Yeah, I think that's something you hear from people who, you read trip reports, you talk to people who had these experiences, and it is like a watershed moment in people's lives. And I'm glad you went into, the mysticism,
Yeah.
because I think, for the folks that have experimented or used this in a medical context, it's like, from a common thing you hear is that it's the first indication that there is something beyond this world,
Yes.
and you kind of tap into that.
Yep.
And you mentioned, having a not fear of death. They're doing psychedelic studies now with people who are terminal cancer,
Yep.
and making it okay for in a sense for them to leave this world. And I mean, my God, if we can do that,
That's part of the work I want to get into, Matt, at the end of all my schooling, to get into psychedelic chaplaincy with people with end of life terminal diagnosis. Because I've seen some of this research that you're talking about, and I've talked to some of these people that led that research, and it's amazing. It's profound to think about, here's this person that has cancer, is going to die, is terrified of that, has this psychedelic experience, still has terminal cancer, is still going to die, and is now at peace with it.
Certainly, certainly. And it seems like it did change your life. It sparked even a new career. So can you go into that and tell
Yeah.
us what the experience has
Uh,
taught you by now?
yeah, absolutely. And this, like I said, this is 2016. People weren't openly talking about this. There's still a stigma. So I'm cautious about talking about the experience. And I am also, I don't have the language. I don't even know how to explain this. And the more, and I would go on to have multiple psychedelic experiences after that with different medicines. And I would continue to have these mystical religious experiences. And I would just put them into this pile of this doesn't make sense, and I don't know, I don't want to talk about this to people. Maybe 2 years after it, I'm at a fundraising event up by Cleveland, Ohio. A Cleveland firefighter invited me. He's like, "Hey, there's this veterans nonprofit, Save a Warrior. They're doing a fundraiser. It sounds like something you might be interested. You want to check it out with me?" Sure. So I go with him, and that's where I meet the founder of Save a Warrior, Jay Clark. And I've never met a human being like that before. I couldn't, I was so enthralled by what he was talking about. I could not take my eyes off of him. I'd never heard anything like this before, Matt, and I've never been pulled to a person in this manner that I was to him. And in the back of my head, I'm like, I'm searching for this thing. I don't know what it is, but I know this guy knows the answer to it. So he's done talking, and I'm pushing people out of the way to get at the front of the line to talk to him because I'm like, this guy's gonna know about psychedelics. He's gonna know about what I experienced. He'll have language for this. So I go right up to him and ask him, I'm like, what do you know about psychedelics? And he's sort of off-putting towards me. He's like, they heal the heart but not the mind, and just change the subject. And that's not what I wanted to hear. And I didn't agree with that. And now that was 2018, we're in 2025, almost 2026. I completely agree with him at this point in time. He's dead on. Psychedelics will drop you into your heart. And that was the love experience that I had. They don't, you'll hear a lot of researchers talk about what they do with the brain. Brain and mind are two different things, Matt. And psychedelics don't work as much with the mind as people would allude to. And I'm tying all this together. I told you I thought I had PTSD and I thought I had it from war. And I went in and I see these clinicians from all different levels, and they're confirming that that's what's going on. They're saying, yeah, you have PTSD from war. Psychedelics, I haven't had an experience with psychedelics that had to deal with war. One, and it was very minimal experience. The majority of life experience that has came up for me with psychedelic use, whether it's with ayahuasca or with other ones, is memories and events and experiences from my childhood. And that didn't make a lot of sense to me when I'm doing these psychedelic experiences. But I hear this Jake Clark talk, and he's talking about the so what of adverse childhood experiences. And then I go through Save a Warrior, and then I'm like, oh, holy fuck. Now I get what these psychedelic experiences are about, why they're showing me those things from my childhood. That's where the post-traumatic stress that I had experienced was coming from. It was coming from my childhood. And Save a Warrior got me to that. And what is really important is that I had that psychedelic experience with ayahuasca before I went to Save a Warrior, because that really opened me up. I was really in my heart going in there, and I was open, and I was willing to have that type of conversation that we have at Save a Warrior. And those two things together in that short amount of time, a couple years apart, my life is unrecognizable today, Matt. It's sometimes I look in the mirror and like, who's that guy?
I'm glad you mentioned Save a Warrior because, of course, it's linked to DAV as a grantee from our charitable service trust that brings veterans, family members, children on retreat style discussing of mental health. And this is something I hear from people who went to Save a Warrior is they go there thinking they're going to talk about an experience in the military, and they uncover something else. And I've also heard this from a veteran I spoke to last year for an article we wrote on psychedelics. People can find it on DAV.org. He's remaining anonymous because of his role in the National Guard, but he went to Jamaica to, help deal with some effects of war, and he ended up. The experience is all about he and his wife and how they recently lost a pregnancy,
Yep.
and it kind of surprised him. You kind of not sure what's going to come up with this.
Yeah, and there's a term of art for this, Matt. It's complex post-traumatic stress. We hear post-traumatic stress disorder nonstop. This complex part is not in the culture. There's an innovation gap in the United States. It takes about 25 years for something to really get embedded in. And we're getting close to that window for this complex PTS. I can get down into two terms for it. It's moral injury in a person's adult life and then developmental trauma in their childhoods. So we're seeing the moral injury in war or for first responders, the jobs that they do in the streets. That's the moral injury. Things are happening that internally through their moral compass, they're feeling that shouldn't happen. So that's what was going on for me when I was in war. Like when the four guys in my platoon got killed, I had moral injury from that. That I felt that shouldn't have happened and it did. What's completely being overlooked is the childhood trauma, the developmental trauma. And the moral injury, Matt, our brains, it can process that. We have this penium chip in the front called the prefrontal cortex, and it can process pain and suffering like you can't imagine. We are built as adult human beings to be able to handle struggle and suffering. We're not as children. We have this very long, nearly 2 decade period where we have to be loved and nurtured and protected before we become adults. And when things happen in that time frame, it really affects us. And we come up with all these strategies to survive that environment when we're little, and we carry those strategies right with us into our adult lives. So the moral injury stuff, when people have these psychedelic experiences, they're not experiencing that a ton because the brain has already been able to process that. It's the stuff in the childhood that's now unlocked because that's part of what psychedelics can do. And then you can get into those memories. So it's really important. This is why psychedelics are not for everybody. And it's also important to prepare yourself to go into that experience and to integrate it on the back end.
I'm really glad you brought that up because you're absolutely right. They're not for everybody. Just like there's no one size fit all solution for most psychiatric, treatments, right? Integration is so important.
Yep.
You have the experience and then you kind of make sense of it. And you see this during the MDMA trials a couple years ago. They only did MDMA 3 times, and they
Yep.
had 8 or 9 integration sessions to kind of
Yep.
make sense. So walk me through a little bit of what that's like.
Yeah, and so I really looked into those studies. And what's cool, I actually, along with Jake Clark, the founder of SAW, I got to have a Zoom call with Jake and with Rick Doblin, the founder of MAPS, who did those 2 MDMA studies. And we got to talk about this. And it's so, and Rick, and if you've listened to him on podcasts, which he's talked about these MDMA studies ad nauseum, he will say it is not the MDMA that is going to these results. It's the therapy. And that's really interesting. And you alluded to it. There's 3 MDMA sessions on those studies, 9 additional non-MDMA therapy sessions to integrate what came up. And we were talking with Rick on that, and we really pointed to the so what of developmental trauma, and he just like was smiling a little bit and was like, yeah, one of the first veterans that I ever worked with MDMA, a retired special operations guy with a lot of combat deployments. The only things that were coming up were the childhood issues. That's what he was spent his whole time talking about. So with integration, and this is something that at Save a Warrior and along with you guys at DAV, we're looking at potentially partnering with organizations that are working with ceremonies right now, and one specifically the Mission Within. We're looking at potentially putting Save a Warrior as the integration right on the back end of their entheogenic ceremony. They work with Ibogaine. So we're looking at pairing these and putting Save a Warrior as a form of integration. Matt, integration is the buzzword. If you talk to anybody about this or go to these psychedelic conferences, everybody talks about integration. Very few people actually have an actual concrete plan. They're up at the abstract level talking about it. So for me, this is an interesting time because everybody's taught the treatment protocol is pretty well hashed out, no matter what psychedelic is being researched or used. Now we're into this phase of what is the integration of this actually look like?
Yeah, you explained it very well. I think one way I would kind of make it to simplify it a little bit is you're taking the MDMA that lowers the barrier for the psychotherapy to really be effective,
Yes.
right? It's like you have an immune system, and if you're sick, your immune system goes to work. Well, maybe you want some vitamin C to strengthen the immune system, but it's still the immune system that really is the doing all the hard work here. So I think that's when you hear psychedelics and MDMA and it has us tied to the illicit drug ecstasy and stuff like that, it gets very scary. We're not talking about drugging up veterans. We're talking about making it easier to discuss some of the darkest days of your life.
Language is everything, Matt. All of our problems and all the solutions to our problems arise in language. So how we talk about this is so important. And we've discussed it. We've in the West we categorize we throw psychedelics in as drugs. So then the general population, we have a negative outlook on drugs in this country. So the overall population, when they hear the word drug, they just think this is bad. So when we start talking about it in different ways, when we start using medicine, like language like medicine or like sacraments, sacraments is the one I prefer because this is how indigenous communities refer to it. And when I say indigenous communities, these are people that have always had connections with these medicines. They've never lost it over all this time. And the way that they talk about it and the way that they use it is vastly different than the way that we talk about it in our general culture here or even in the medical model. We say we reference it as psychedelic assisted therapy. Indigenous communities say entheogenic ceremonies. That's the language they use and that's how they do it. There's a major distinction between those. The term psychedelic, that means mind manifesting. Entheogen means generating the divine within. And then the difference between therapy and ceremony. Ceremony is done in a circle where everybody's engaging together. Therapy is one person is having the experience and there's people that they can talk to it about. So there's so many different ways that this is going on.
We're getting to the end here now, and I'm asking
Yep.
one last question here is,
Yep.
how do you see your future post psychedelics? How has that changed your life?
It was the beginning. How the language I use now, which and I'm nearly a decade out from that first ayahuasca experience. That it was the beginning of a spiritual awakening for me. It was the like I said, there's a clear distinction. It's that woke me up spiritually. The more that time goes by, the more I'm living a spiritual life moment to moment, as opposed to just certain times of the day and certain practices or certain ceremonies or things. Just more of my every waking moment is becoming more spiritual, and it's directly correlated to that first use with ayahuasca.